I'm what your mom hoped you wouldn't become. I am Gomer, a wife of whoredom. I grew up in noise, not the ruckus from the market, but the roar inside my head of men arguing, women sighing, or neighbors judging. My world was simple, brutal, and masculine. A woman's value was tethered to her father's name, her husband's protection, and her virginity. My first fall wasn't a choice. It was a desperate clutch at life. Poverty is a predator that forced me into a terrible trade. The prophets call it whoredom, but to me, it was survival. You're thinking I had choices. I'll show you how the chains were forged long before I fell. In the reign of Jeroboam, my father Diblain worked with fig cakes, struggling to achieve stability or security. We rot in poverty, so I wanted more for myself. But when my lineage failed me, I ran to look in the temple, not through prayers but from men, elite, priests, or commoners, it didn't matter, provided they could pay. To women, I was filth, a cautionary tale to warn young girls about. To men, I was a needed function, a tolerated outlet, useful but never respectable. Guess what that does to a woman? I became a deep psychic wound. The only way to survive the crushing dislike was to feel nothing. I embraced the chaos. My rules were simple. You pay, I serve, we both pretend. It was a false, fleeting power. But for a girl with nothing, it felt like the only power I had. I had built an impenetrable shell, a safe armor against a judging world. I was surviving, maybe even thriving in the shadows. The streets were my fortress. My life was a high-wire act of constant distraction, and I told myself I loved the thrill. Then came the prophet Hosea. He didn't come with a lover's whisper or a buyer's coin. He came with a terrible, demanding order from God to marry me as a lesson to Israelites. The shock that rippled through Israel must have been a physical blow. It was a scandalous marriage, a prophet taking a harlot for a bride. I was supposed to be his object lesson, his living sermon for faithless Israel. But God had other plans. His house was safe but suffocating. The silence was loud, it made me hear myself, and I hated that voice. His righteous love felt like a form of control. He needed my soul to be pure, but my soul was addicted to the narcotic of chaos, the rush of a momentary escape, the familiar high of being desired without being truly known. I bore his 3 children, Jezreel, Lo-Ruhamah, Lo-Ammi, each one an echoing judgment, living parables of my own shame. One night I found myself walking toward the familiar sound of the city, and I didn't look back. That was my second fall. The world was shocked, but to me, I was just returning to the only place I knew how to stand. I sought out my old lovers for the simplicity of the transaction. They gave me bread, wool, linen, oil, and wine. Their gifts were simple, easier to accept than the heavy, complicated grace of my husband. I kept choosing the easy chemical high of a quick transaction over the long, hard work of stability. I told myself I deserved pleasure, luxury, wine, and oil, but what I really wanted was peace. I was just hungry for safety, worth, or someone to say, "You're enough, even when you're not perfect." My desire for the thrill didn't stop until I had hit the very bottom. I fell so far, so fast, that the false autonomy of the streets vanished. I ended up where every woman in my position dreaded, humiliated, broken, used, and sold into slavery. I became a slave, an object waiting to be disposed of and repossessed. I sought freedom and ended up in chains. Look at me now. To the world, I am an illustration of everything a woman should not become. I was a punching bag that men could hit, scratch, and abuse without guilt. I am a living, breathing sermon, a symbol of Israel's repeated betrayal. I was displayed at the market block, broken, discarded, despised, and detested like a piece of property, waiting for the final, humiliating transaction. What price would be paid for a woman who had broken a prophet's heart? I knew it would be a condemnation. Then, I saw my husband Hosea. Sent again by God to redeem me, he paid the price. 15 pieces of silver and a homer. He bought back not a wife, but a discarded piece of property, just to prove that God never lets go of faithless Israel. My greatest regrets are not trusting God's promises, and the years I spent believing I was only valuable as a means to an end. And maybe the real sin is what I did with my body, but also what I allowed the world to do to my heart. Here are a few lessons that I want you to learn from my story. 1. Trauma affects your productivity. The harsh conditions in social and economic norms were harsh for women and left them with no financial stability. The slave trade, arranged marriages, male-dominated lifestyles, and limited education affected my self-worth and self-belief in trade. I ran for quick fixes to meet my immediate needs and desires. Women like me aren't always selling our bodies for bread. Sometimes we're selling our silence, our boundaries, our dreams, just to be accepted. 2. Scarcity mentality rewires your brain negatively. You start by craving chaos because wealth feels foreign. You avoid opportunities because you expect them to vanish. You wear mediocrity like armor because risking feels unsafe. The cruelest oppressor isn't the system, it's the voice in our heads telling us we're unworthy of success. 3. Peace doesn't live in the money you earn. It lives in truth. I had been fighting systems of patriarchy, poverty, and judgment, but my own shame still imprisoned me. Healing isn't about going back to who you were. It's found in resting and owning your story, without shame, without apology. The weakness, the running, the desire for a familiar escape that is human. But the deepest shame is not the act, but the belief that you are unforgivable. 4. To overcome a poverty mentality, you must first challenge the belief that there's never enough. Replace fear with faith and growth. Believe that opportunities expand when you do. Also, practice gratitude daily to shift focus from lack to abundance. Learn to invest instead of merely save. Money must circulate to multiply. Surround yourself with people who think big and act boldly. Mindsets are contagious. Additionally, build financial literacy to break generational patterns of fear around money. Stop tying your worth to struggle. Wealth doesn't make you selfish. It makes you capable of giving more. Lastly, cultivate patience. True wealth is grown, not grabbed. When you trust your ability to create rather than chase survival, you move from desperation to peace, and from scarcity to sustainable prosperity.